First of all, we'll give you a little background on the information base that we use and how we get it. And then we'll go into a tool that you can use at home, download and put in your own numbers and work out individual cash rents per crop. And then the second half, later on this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we'll be getting into another program called Fair Rent, which I think is an excellent program that you can use, and it's free and it's available and so forth. We'll talk more about that then. When we look back at numbers and try and come up with crop budgets, one of the things that we look at is the past history, obviously. This is 572,000 acres of cropland in what we call Region 3, which is basically Carrington, Jamestown area, east of Bismarck and west of Wapaton. Okay, and a little bit of the Red River Valley by Fargo. So this is where all of this information comes from. And you'll note up here that this is a 5-year base. So we've got 71 pinto bean fields in that 5 years, 496 soybean fields, 218,000 acres of soybeans, corn, 108,000 acres of corn, and so forth. So we've got a lot of acres, a lot of database, and it comes out of what we call the south central part of the state. The average yield is shown for each of these crops. I won't take you through each one of them individually, but maybe we'll just pick on one here like pinto beans and just go down the column. The yield was at 1,844 pounds. The average 5-year value was $30.90 a hundredweight, or 31 cents a pound. The average production was worth $571.32 a year. Okay, so that's our income for the 5-year average. Seed, fertilizer, chemical, crop insurance, fuel oil, repairs, custom hire, and land rent. You look at those land rents and you think those are really low. Where did you get those? Well, keep in mind this is a 5-year average. So a lot of the numbers in here are more pertinent, for example, than the land rent might be because of what's happened with land rents in the last 3-4 years. When we get down here to the bottom of this part, we have $270 of what we call direct costs and $300.58 of return over direct, or money that we can use to pay what we call overhead costs. Overhead costs are listed here. The two biggest ones are usually hired labor and machinery and building depreciation. And these are regional numbers. Locally, we see our depreciation and our overhead costs about 10 to 20% larger than the region for some reason on a per acre basis. The farms we've worked with tend to be about 30% larger than the regional average, but when you go back on a per acre basis, we also tend to spend more on our overhead expenses. But up here we come in with overhead of about $65 on pinto beans. Subtract that from the 300, we have about $235 of net return. $14.68 in direct costs to raise pintos, $18.23 in all costs. Net return over 5 years was $12.75 a hundredweight. Break-even yield was 1,083 pounds. And if you put the government direct payments we had in the last few years over that, we come up with a net return of about $245 per acre, including the government payment. Then if you go across with corn, $160, soybeans, $139, or barley, excuse me. And this one surprises a lot of people. And I know the first question we always get is, it still itches? Yes. But barley is in either second, third, or fourth about 90% of the time in net farm income. And then we get to soybeans, then we get to wheat, canola, and then sunflowers. And again, these are 5-year averages. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at using the 2013 numbers and developing some budgets with that. This is something that we put together to help people just get a little easier way to look at all those different numbers and be able to use them. This is the break-even cost per unit of production without any operator labor charge. What does that mean? That means we include all the expenses in here, including depreciation, but you have zero as far as operator labor charge. In other words, you will get yours out of the net farm income if there is some. What we have here is Region 3. In just 2013, the average cost to raise barley on cash rented ground without rent was $252. If we take that number and then go with different yields, 65, 75, 85, and 95 for barley, and then enter a $50 rent, a $70 rent, a $90 rent, and a $110 rent, what it tells us, for example, is that if we raise 75 bushel barley and I pay $90 for rent, my break even on barley is $4.56. If I pay $110 for rent, it kicks it up to $4.83. If I get 85 bushel barley at 90, it's $4.03. Okay, seems like a pretty simple chart, a pretty simple graph. We've run off a number of these, and we've encouraged producers we work with to take them and lay them out in front of their landlord and discuss rents with them. Because there's a feeling out there that the rent should be here or here, but the net income is way back, or the break-even price is back over here somewhere. Okay, so the two aren't matching up right now. If you look at other ones down here, we have corn. If we have $90 acre rent on corn, our corn costs are $446.07 in the region, and our local corn costs in 2013 were $476 without rent. So you put rent on top of $476, and how much rent could you pay at 120 bushel corn? At $90 rent, we would need $4.47 to break even. Again, that pays depreciation, which handles principal and interest probably on your bank note on the equipment, but it does not pay you, the operator, anything for farming it. Okay? So this sheet is one that you can just take, you know, it's a simple grid. You can also find this on Center Points. If you Google Center Points, you'll come up with a neat little weekly news information item that is new at the center here this year. And this is also listed as one of the topics in there back a couple months ago. This is a spreadsheet that is available on the website, ndfarmmanagement.com. You can Google that site, you can download this. This particular one, there's another one on there from October when we had our fall marketing seminar. This one will be uploaded right after Christmas. This is on Excel. And I should mention that because every once in a while somebody will call in and say, I got this and I can't make it work. And we've learned now that the first question to ask is, do you have Excel? And it's surprising how many people don't have Excel on a new computer. That's where you get a good deal on it, but it doesn't include the office software maybe. Anyway, make sure you have Excel. Okay, let's talk about this budget. It's color-coded, so anything in green you can input. And the yellow is calculated information. So let's take a look at it. Let's take wheat, for example. Yield of 50 bushels. The price is $6, and that was 50 under the December basis on Friday. That's up about a dime now, so you could say we got 310 wheat. And then we put in what we felt are the seed, fertilizer, chemical, and other expenses for the coming year. It's handy to look back at that information you just had on a 5-year average, but you can't use a 5-year average when estimating expenses, because the expenses you pay are the expenses you had last year plus some more usually. Very seldom do we see expenses go backwards. Fuel and oil we did reduce by about 10% or $2 an acre, and as of this morning I guess we could probably take it down another $2 an acre, or maybe $3. We're hearing tanker loads now at just over $2, so that's going to help quite a bit on the fuel bill. Although fuel is actually a minor expense when it comes to raising the crop. Repairs 21, we put in a land cost of $80 an acre. You're running rate and you rent land for $80 an acre nowadays. Well, you have to have some kind of a land charge in here, and it could be an opportunity cost. If you own the land, you could put in here the value of the real estate taxes plus what you feel you could rent it to your neighbor for if you wanted to. Or you could just put in the flat rental rate. And I used 80 in here. $80 at 4%, if you had 4% interest, will make a 20-year payment on $1,100 land. Okay? And today that's probably pasture land. So it doesn't go very far in paying debt. Operating interest, estimated interest amount, and miscellaneous, and we come up with those direct costs again. Then we get into this section called overhead costs. On this side, if you're looking at this side of the sheet, you'll see $70 all the way across for overhead. There's always a question on how do you handle overhead expenses on a farm. On the back side of the sheet, you'll see 60, 60, 60, 90, 90, 60. In other words, when you get into crops like corn and pinto beans, we know that they take more overhead. Okay? The question is, once the money's sunk in the overhead, how do you make those overhead payments? Okay, can you actually select the crop based on that overhead, or should the overhead be spread out at a more even number like 70 across all the crops? If you take 10% of the value of your machinery and 3% of your buildings and add on to it things like your long-term and machinery interest, your hired labor, utilities, farm insurance, and divide that by your crop acres, you'll come up with what number you would put in here for your own farm. And I'm willing to bet you're going to be somewhere between $60 and $90. Just about all the time. It's really tough to get overheads down under about $55, $60. It really takes some work. So we get a total overhead expense of about $70. That gives us a net expense of $341. Miscellaneous payments, we have nothing in there. There are going to be some farm payments, but it's tough to put them in a budget when you do not get them till October 1st of the following year. Okay, so you can plan for them, but for the sake of, just for the ease of looking at this, we decided to leave those out. So what does that tell us on wheat, for example? 50 bushel wheat at $6, we would be losing about $41.50 an acre. I should mention too, our nitrogen cost in here is 47 cents an acre, half urea, half anhydrous, 700 and 450 a ton. And then we use 650 to 700 a ton for phosphorus and potassium fertilizers, which was about $18 an acre. So we get down here and we have a net return of a minus 41.50 or a minus 12% cash flow. What would the price have to be to make that work? It comes down here, it would be $6.83 an acre. If we wanted to make another $50 or charge this budget $50 for my labor, I would need what? $7.83. If I wanted to go halfway in between there, I'd be paying myself $25 an acre for doing these. When you set up this overhead cost here, if you wanted to pay in $70 for your overheads and then $30 an acre for your own labor, you could do that. That way, when you calculate these costs, you are building in an operator draw or a family living cost or whatever you want to call it. Okay, you do have some operator money in there to work with. So if we go down here, net return, $100, we need $8.83. The break-even yield on wheat on this particular one would be 56.9 bushels. So if we went up here and plugged in 56.9, we would come up with a net return of 0. Okay? Let's go across and take a look at soybeans. Soybeans were 35. On Friday they were 9.30 and we used them on a 90 under basis. And that gave us, on your sheet there, $245 of direct expense. Another comment on fertilizer, and this is one of the inputs that we often see people cut back on to save a little money in the spring. If you get into wheat over here and you're selling $6 wheat, what's the fertilizer cost per bushel? $1.54. How many times will you eliminate $1.54 to save $6? Okay, but that's one of the first things people think about is maybe just cut back on the fertilizer a little bit. In a year like this, if anything, we need to max our production because the prices are lower. So, and this isn't an advertisement for the man that was just here on fertilizer, you know. But that's just a fact. One of the first things people talk about is, well, I usually put 50 pounds on my beans and they do really well, but this year I'm going to save that money. You really got to look at that and look up some numbers and see if it's worth it. Because when you start saving $1.54 a bushel on wheat, and then you miss that bushel for $6, all these other costs are the same. Nothing changes. It doesn't cost any less to spray a field for 59 bushel wheat than it does for 60. Okay? So make sure when you look at costs, the one we could probably save on is when we get into these overheads. But we've done a lot of machinery trading and building and grain dryer building and storage building, and we've pretty well hung ourselves with the overhead costs that we've got. And now you've got to figure out a way to work it out. And by using some kind of an even number here, we can get that across here. Our break-even price on soybeans comes out right at $9. If we want to make $100 an acre more than that, we need $11.86. And our break-even yield is 33.4 bushels, or 33.9 bushels. Let's take corn. 130 bushel corn. And when I did these budgets, I used the old fertilizer standards from NDSU, where we use 1.2 pounds per bushel. I still have a hard time relating my production and my anticipated yield and production to an anticipated market, and then cutting my fertilizer back accordingly. I tend to think we need to almost maximize this production in order to get the money that we need to make this work. But I used 130 bushel corn, which is above our 5-year average here just slightly. I used 350, which is 80 under on the basis. And you have direct costs on your sheet, I believe, of $404. And then we spread the overheads evenly, and we come up with 70. Total expense of $474. Net return is $19 an acre negative, or a 4% loss. If you flip that sheet over and just look at the other side for a minute, just to give you an idea, if you find the same column for corn and you look at the net return over there, the net return is what? Minus 39. The difference is the actual overheads on corn, if you look at it crop by crop, are probably between $90 and $110 in this area. Okay, so if you were actually going to make corn generate its own overhead cost repayment, you'd have to charge it $90 to $100. Because it's about $30 to $40 more than our small grains and so forth. But what we did here is we said, these are sunken costs. How do we make this farm cash flow the best we can to cover all of these things? So we used 70 and we spread it out evenly. What we come up with for a break-even price on corn then is $365. If you run this and we happen to get a bump in the corn market over some weather thing this winter and corn goes up to $385 or $390, that's something to think about selling. And of course, as soon as it goes up to $385 or $390, the first thought is that we're finally out of the pits and now we're making some good progress on corn. And about that time, we spin off about 2 days when we're down and we lose it all. The other thing you might think about along a marketing standpoint is if you were going to go out and buy a corn call option today at $4, and I'm not sure what that would cost or whatever the future's at, $4.30 or $4.40, and then when the market goes up another 20, 30 cents, then go ahead and sell and let the option give you the rest of the upside if there is any. But that's a strategy that you've got to think about ahead of time. It doesn't work very well to do it that day because everybody wants a call option and they get pretty expensive. Barley, 75 bushel barley at 5, and that's about the best contract price that we hear of today. Our total expenses at $328. Our net return is $46.75, and you'll note next to pinto beans, that's going to be number 1 again. Our break-even price is $438 to raise barley. And as I mentioned before, barley has usually been coming in either first, second, or third, about 9 years out of 10. It's still a good crop. The biggest problem is making delivery and getting it past all of the scales and the adjustments and so forth. Canola, I used 1,800 pounds at $16, and we came in at a minus $72, 20% off. Break-even price on canola has to be right around 20. Interesting to note that the new oil price in the farm bill is 2015 for all your oil crops. And pinto beans, I don't know if anybody in here has any knowledge on a contract. I'd appreciate knowing what they're going for. We plugged in 25. The other day I heard somebody say 22 would be good now if they could get 22. Well, at 25 and 1,700 pounds, we would come up with $54. So if we cut this by about $3, that would eliminate the profit on pinto beans. They would be back to 0. Okay, our pinto bean cost is about $21.82 for a price on a break-even yield, and we're plugging in 25, so 22 wouldn't give us much of a net above that. Okay, any questions on that? That's available at ndfarmmanagement.com. You can download it there. If you can't get it there, just stop in here or send us your email. We'll send it out. This one will be posted here in a few days, so it will be available. Any questions or comments?
Can you explain why cash rents are going up 40 to 60% over last year?
They have a lot better computer than I do. No. The biggest thing on cash rents is one individual can move into an area or come into an area and pay $30, $40, $50 over the going rent. And that word travels around to the landlords faster than anything else. And I get at least 2 to 3 calls a day on what do I tell my landlord. And all you can do is lay this kind of information out in front of them, or this particular one that's got the prices and the rents on there with the expenses, and you pick the rent, and then they'll say, a lot of people say, well, the landlord says so, because so-and-so is willing to pay 90 and you only offer me 60 or 50 or 40 or 70. And it's just something you have to deal with. A lot of this land is being rented on last year's profits. Guys have got grain in the bin, they're taking it out, they don't realize that they're spending last year's profits on this year, unless you're on an accrued accounting system like we do with farm management, You don't pick up on that. So you just think, well, I've got all this money, I may as well, I can afford to pay that rent. But what you're really doing is you're taking last year's profits and turning it into losses for this year. So, you greatly reduce your profitability this year by doing that.